Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today. This is our Friday edition, and in just a few minutes, we are going to spend some time talking with our roundtable guests and have a discussion of kind of the last Friday of 2018. And that means that at 1 o'clock, we'll have Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos in studio. But my plan here before then is to, first of all, cover some questions related to the shutdown. I think this is going to last a long time, and I'll explain for that in just a minute why I believe that. And then at the bottom of the hour, then we have Representative Cole Hefner, who represents kind of the Mount Pleasant area in Texas. And again, just get an update on what he thinks is going to happen in the Texas legislature. And so I think that's going to be helpful for you to hear from him as well. So we've got a lot to cover over the next couple of hours. And if you are wondering if the shutdown is going to last for a while, there is very good evidence to suggest that indeed it is, because we're starting to see all sorts of comments made by both Republicans and Democrats that they are convinced that this is not going to change anytime soon. And I'll just give you one of the articles we've posted here. It says the partial U.S. shutdown is likely to continue well into 2019, after House Republicans said Thursday they didn't even plan any votes this week. And President Donald Trump said most of the federal employees losing pay because of the closure are Democrats. So the argument he's making now is the Democrats' intransigence and their unwillingness to compromise is actually hurting their fellow Democrats. I don't know if that's true. He didn't really give any evidence for it. But nevertheless, both Republicans and Democrats suggested Thursday night that it could still be in effect by the time President Donald Trump, gives the State of the Union address, which is scheduled for January 22nd. That is weeks from now, in case you haven't figured that out. And so it is quite possible that they are convinced that there is going to be a digging in of the heels. And so that's pretty significant. Senators have been told that they'll vote only once there's a deal backed by Democrats and by Trump. So the bottom line is we already have a budget deal that was already signed, or at least passed and approved, I guess the best way to say it, by the House, sent over to the Senate. But now, of course, we're waiting to see if the Senate would go along or whether they come up with a compromise. I might just mention, by the way, that Vice President Mike Pence has put together a compromise, and the response from the Democrats was nothing. Not, we don't like it, we disagree with it, try again, just totally ignoring even trying to find a compromise. So a couple more of those might give the president and some other individuals that are trying to push for the wall a little more, if you will, intellectual ammunition to point out, here's what we proposed, here's the compromise we proposed, here's another compromise we proposed, and we still are getting nothing from the Democrats. So we'll see where that goes. Right now, most Americans tend to blame the president for the shutdown, although a percentage also blame the Democrats. And so this vote will take place sometime if there's not a standoff, but there's no evidence at the moment that standoff and that shutdown is going to change anytime soon. So let's go to White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who said, quote, "The president has made clear that any bill to fund the government must adequately fund border security to stop the flow of illegal drugs, criminals, MS-13 gang members, child smugglers, and human traffickers in our communities and protect the American people." Then she went on to say the president does not want the government to remain shut down, but he will not sign a proposal that does not first prioritize our country's safety and security. And as I pointed out, of course, there have been some attempts to have a compromise. And then, interestingly enough, Nancy Pelosi says Democrats have offered Republicans 3 options to reopen government that all include funding for strong, sensible, and effective border security, but not the president's immoral, ineffective, and expensive wall. So again, as long as the word wall is not in the bill, we're good. And really, it's just a continuing resolution, but you know what I'm getting at there. And so, of course, what's happening on the horizon? Well, according to this first article we've posted here, there's a tremendous amount of volatility. And if you've listened to this program this week, you know that the stock market has been up and down like never before. You have the worst Christmas Eve on Wall Street ever. And so after dropping all of that distance, all of a sudden then it bounces up the day after Christmas, and then it was all over the map yesterday. Who knows where it's going to be today? But again, stocks bouncing back from the lows of the day after flirting with a bear market, higher interest rates, and the political turmoil in Washington. The S&P 500 Dow Jones Industrial Average turned green in a late jump after trading negative for most of the day. And so, of course, that is one aspect of this, the stock market. The other, and I want to get to this after the break, is what does the shutdown really mean? Because since it's going to be around for a while, I thought I'd kind of review some of the things we just mentioned in passing the other day. But it does mean that federal workers will begin to lose money starting with Friday's paycheck. That is according to the National Treasury Employees Union President, Tony Reardon. That check will reflect work through last Saturday, the day the shutdown began. That means Saturday shift workers, including many in Customs and Border Protection, won't see pay for that day in their checks. All workers in the 9 departments and dozens of agencies with funding lapses will miss their January 11th paycheck if the shutdown continues. So that's what's happening to them. And again, the stakes were raised even more significant by the president, because now President Donald Trump today warned that as the weekend began, he'll close every port of entry if he doesn't see progress, not only on his wall, but a total immigration overhaul. He's even said that he would cut off aid to Central America as there's now evidence of a new caravan. And if you don't receive Donald Trump's tweets, and I don't because everybody else publishes them anyway, this is the tweet that came out December 28th. Quote, "We will be forced to close the southern border entirely if the obstructionist Democrats do not give us the money to finish the wall and also change the ridiculous immigration laws that our country is saddled with. Hard to believe there was a Congress and a president who would approve." So there we go. And so the federal shutdown is, again, a partial shutdown, but it does affect certain agencies. It will affect the paychecks of thousands of workers. There are some now even trying to pull at our heartstrings, saying that because they are not going to get their next paycheck, which would be the January paycheck, they decided to return some of their holiday presents or Christmas presents. Maybe they did, and whatever, that's something that's being said here. Others are saying that because we're leaving the parks open, but we don't have the parks being funded, they're being left open to illegal activity and vandalism. So you're going to hear quite a bit over the next few, now it turns out to be maybe even not just days, but weeks, about how the shutdown is destroying America. So that's why when we come back, I want to just review again, since we're going to be hearing about this for some time, some of the myths about the federal shutdown. Then we'll talk with Representative Cole Hefner at the bottom of the hour till the top of the hour about what is happening in the Texas legislature next session and what we could be looking forward to and what kind of legislation might actually be passed, in this case, by the Texas House, since so much of the legislation passed by the Senate never is even considered in the House. Now with the new Speaker of the House, maybe that changes things. So we'll talk with him about that, and we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we've heard quite a bit these days about fake news, but what about fake science? That is the title of a book by Austin Ruse. He has served as the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights, where he testifies to our government and the United Nations about important issues. He was on my radio program recently to talk about some of the misinformation and false information presented in the media and in various governmental hearings. Some of the book deals with homosexuality and the transgender issue. One chapter addresses whether homosexuals are born that way and whether orientations are immutable. In other words, can people change their sexual orientation? Another chapter addresses the studies that attempt to argue that there is no difference between traditional parents and homosexual parents rearing children. This grand experiment on children has been detrimental to their physical and psychological health. That is why he wanted to set the record straight. Some states have very strict labeling laws for food. Even a minuscule amount of a naturally occurring chemical must have a warning label. But Austin Ruse points out that in order to hit the cancer target zone for acrylamide, a child would have to eat 182 pounds of French fries every single day. A teenager wouldn't even do that on a dare. For decades, Austin Ruse has been testifying on pro-life issues. He reminds us in one chapter that nearly everything the secular media and pro-abortion groups say about abortion is a lie. The same could be said about these groups and what they say about sex education. And he laments how the population control advocates are driving many countries towards a demographic winner. I recommend you read the book, and if you're skeptical of the claims, check out the more than 40 pages of endnotes documenting his critique of fake science. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, in just a few minutes, we'll be talking with Representative Cole Hefner about what is happening in the Texas legislature and legislation he may be proposing and maybe just the prospects for a variety of different things from pro-life initiatives. He's certainly a strong proponent of the Second Amendment, so we'll talk about that. What about property tax relief and much, much more. So we'll be talking with him. Next hour, of course, then we will have our roundtable discussion with Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos. Penna Dexter, by the way, will be with us on Monday along with Nick Pitts. We'll do a final kind of year in review on Monday. So this is an opportunity on two separate occasions kind of to look back over 2018. Most importantly, look ahead to 2019. And so those are some things that we will be talking about as well. One of the articles we posted the other day, which again you can read in its entirety, are the 9 myths about the federal shutdown. And I covered them the other day fairly quickly because I thought, well, it might be good since you'll hear a few people mentioning it before the shutdown ends. Now, in light of what we've just read a minute ago, the possibility that even during the State of the Union address, which is, again, January 22nd, we still may have a shutdown. If that's the case, I mean, this is going to be a drumbeat every single day. So I thought I might just review these in a little more detail because you're going to need those if indeed people come up and say, well, what do you think about the shutdown? You know, and again, some are going to want to blame the president. Some are going to want to blame Democrats. Some are just going to say, look, I've just had it with all of Washington, D.C. I don't care who's to blame. I just wish they'd do their job. When we don't get any kind of agreement in our business or in our church, sooner or later we find some compromise or we ask some people to leave or something so that we can get the work done that we're supposed to do. And to shut down a fourth of the government, I know, causes a lot of people's heads to explode. So we'll certainly get into that, I suspect, as well when we talk with Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos in just a minute. But again, let me go through this. It was posted on Newsmax, but since it was one of those premium articles, that's why I wanted to make it available to you, since you may not actually have access to some of the material that is oftentimes on the websites. And so we do have it there. It was on our website at pointofview.net, and you just go back and find it from just a day ago. And the first myth is it is a shutdown. I think Michael Dorstowitz said if the deadline is missed, which it was, the lights of government are not going to be turned off. In fact, most of the functions of government will continue as if nothing has happened, because, as we've already been saying for a couple of days now, but we need to remind everybody as well, 75% of the government is fully funded into the next year, including the Defense Department. So again, it is not a full shutdown, it's a partial shutdown, and it is going to affect people in Homeland Security and a variety of other places and agriculture, but it's not going to affect the vital functions, which leads me to the second myth, and that is public safety will be impacted. No, it will not. First of all, you just heard me say that the Department of Defense is funded, so that's not even an issue. But you might remember that the Coast Guard, for reasons explained only under the Bush administration, was not put in the Defense Department, but put in Homeland Security. So since it's in Homeland Security, it's one of those agencies that's not actually funded at the moment. Nevertheless, this article, I think, wisely points out that its essential functions and activities will continue. That would be search and rescue, drug interdiction, all of the rest. And the Chief Warrant Officer for the Coast Guard, Barry Lane, says that the service continues operations authorized by law that provide for national security or that protect life and property during partial government shutdowns. So some of the non-essential functions of the Coast Guard, that would be like testing and licensing of merchant mariners, that might come to a halt at the moment, but otherwise everything else is going to be fully functioning, and it is not going to threaten our safety. And I say this to remind you that you're going to hear, maybe not mainstream media, although you might, but you are certainly going to see on Facebook, Twitter, blogs, emails, look, this is endangering the American people. And so it's important to recognize that, first of all, the Defense Department is fully functioning and fully funded, and Coast Guard is not totally funded, but all essential activities of the Coast Guard will continue unimpeded. Let's take the third myth. The public will be strongly impacted. And the argument that is oftentimes made is, well, that's going to affect the mail. No, it isn't. I went to the mail the other day, went to the post office. Everything's just business as usual. Some people last Friday called in and asked, will I get my Social Security checks? No, you'll get your Social Security checks. Checks for retirees, disabled, veterans get their checks, all of those kinds of things. Where it would affect some of us, and actually will affect me, is I just tried to renew my passport application. It did arrive there the other day, but it's probably just sitting there on a stack. So that one probably will not happen right now. And, of course, the whole issue of trying to get tourist and student visas might be affected. Of course, you just heard me a minute ago say that Donald Trump is saying that he may even close the southern border. He might do a lot more than that before it's all through, so we'll see where that goes. But nevertheless, the public is not going to be adversely impacted on the essential functions of the government. But if you've put in a loan application or you're waiting for some kind of ruling in agriculture or Homeland Security, something like that, maybe it will affect you for a while. Myth number 4, monuments will be closed. No. Now, to be fair, they were in the past when President Barack Obama was really trying to make a point in 2013. They went out of their way to not only close down the national parks, which, by the way, will be closed in many cases, but also to even block, for example, the World War II monument. But in this particular case, some of these, of course, national parks are closed, but all the national monuments, that would be Lincoln Memorial, Vietnam Memorial, World War II Memorial, all those are going to be open, and anybody visiting Washington, D.C. this week probably wouldn't notice a whole lot of difference. And based on the past experience, there's no reason to believe that that will be disrupted in any significant way. Myth number 5, the Smithsonian will be closed. Well, that kind of fits just like the other one. Just like the memorials, President Obama kept the Smithsonian closed, but we have every reason to believe it will still be open, in large part because last time we had a January shutdown, President Trump did not close it down. Myth number 6, the shutdown only affects the federal government. Now, this is the one where, again, some of the states will be starting to complain because the certain aspects of the state, depending on various functions from the federal government, will be impeded. Again, this is going to be in certain departments that are not funded, like agriculture, which I think may be the most significant. And so we'll see what that actually does there as well. Myth number 7, troops deployed overseas will be denied recreational activities. Nope. Even though back in 2013, President Obama actually did close down the American Forces Network, and that broadcasts sports and entertainment and things like that to soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines and the Coast Guard. During the January shutdown last year and this time, the Trump administration kept the games coming and the troops entertained, and I think there's every reason to believe that will continue for the near future. Myth number 8, shutdowns save money. Not really. As a matter of fact, shutdowns actually cost the taxpayer significantly, because even though you're furloughing these individuals, and as I pointed out just a minute ago, some of them will not get maybe that January 11th paycheck, they will get paid after the fact. So essentially what we're doing is paying people after the fact to go on vacation. So no work is being done in those departments, but they're not going to lose their pay. They'll lose it right now, but they will usually, in almost every other case, be reimbursed later on. So in some respects, we spend money, but we don't get any productive activity after those individuals are there. And myth number 9, visitors will be shut out of Mount Vernon. And I always love to use this one because back in 2013, President Obama actually did barricade the entry into the estate, which was established by George Washington, until someone pointed out, well, wait a minute, the Mount Vernon is not owned by the federal government. Mount Vernon is not administered by the National Park Service. It is privately owned. And at that point, the administration was kind of red-faced and even a little bit embarrassed because they had no right to close it down. And, of course, Mount Vernon will still exist. So if you want to travel to Washington, D.C., even before the new year is over, or begins, or this year is over, this is an opportunity for you to still pretty much have business as usual in Washington, D.C., which, by the way, is very different than it was in the shutdown that happened in 2013. But I do predict that it's going to last for a while. I had no idea until I read this today that some actually believe that it might continue on even to when President Trump gives the State of the Union address January 22nd. So if you think there's a little bit of ruffling of feathers now, just imagine what it's like after weeks of a government shutdown. Even if it's a partial shutdown, we're going to be hearing a lot more about it, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you to have access to the 9 myths about the federal shutdown. We'll probably put some more of those up as time goes on, but we need to take a break. We'll come back right after this.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
One of the things I've said is I really enjoy this first hour that has been added to our lineup because it is primarily heard by people in the state of Texas, and it really gives us a chance to emphasize some of the things happening in the Texas legislature, which is going to be convening in January. And so I think you're going to, once again, appreciate this conversation, especially as we go back out to East Texas. It's amazing how many of the people in East Texas we love. Of course, Representative Louis Gohmert, representing the 1st Congressional District out there. He's been on the program with us many times. Matter of fact, sat in this chair sometimes to co-host or guest host with me. I know he was on with Sean Hannity the other day as a guest host, and so we've certainly had a great relationship with him. Just a couple weeks ago, we had Texas Senator Brian Hughes on, and he's been a good friend for many years, and talking about what is going to happen in the Senate this coming January. And let's now talk about what's going to happen in the Texas House. And we go to another person from East Texas, Representative Cole Hefner. He lives kind of in the Mount Pleasant area, and if you travel to that part of East Texas, you know exactly where that is. It's House District 5, individual that has been in the House of Representatives in Texas and has served in the past as a county commissioner and a variety of others. But primarily what he brings, I think, is having spent years in the construction industry, owning his own business, being a small business owner, really understands some of the needs of business. Also comes with a 100% pro-life kind of voting record, as well as a very strong defender of the Second Amendment. We've got a lot to talk about. So, Representative Cole Hefner, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
You bet. Thanks for having me, guys.
Talk about your district, because it seems like every time we talk with somebody from East Texas, you guys have lots of common sense, and you're the kind of people we wish we had more of in some of these cities in the state of Texas.
I tell you, it's a special place out here, and it's, you know, I grew up in Pittsburgh and never moved far. I lived a little bit in Gilmer, a little while, just to the south, about 10 miles, and then now I live about 10 miles north in Mount Pleasant. And so just to feel at home out here. Our folks are laid back, common sense, conservative Christian folks. And it's a great place to represent. It's a great place to live.
Let's see if we can talk about the legislature, because as we've said so often on the program, but I'll say it again, when we look at the national situation, and we will be talking about that with Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos in just a few minutes, we see that oftentimes good legislation in the House goes to die in the Senate. But the reverse has been taking place in Texas for many years. There have been some really good pieces of legislation that have passed the Texas Senate that go and die in the House. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the former Speaker of the House was not as sympathetic to some of those particular bills and those kinds of legislative initiatives. But you now look like you're going to have a new Speaker of the House, and that looks like it's going to change the game rather dramatically. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, you know, we're very optimistic about the changes that are coming. And, you know, if you go all the way back to 2009, when Speaker Strauss was elected Speaker, you know, there was about 65 Democrats and 11 Republicans that kind of put him in power. And so when you have a dynamic like that, you tend to, where your base of support come from the left, that's where you tend to kind of lean. And so with Representative Bonham coming, we've got not only was he drafted by the Republican caucus, but he was drafted from the conservative half of the most conservative half of the Republican caucus. And so we look forward to him being, you know, fair to everybody, but beholden in you know, in the fundamentals to the conservative wing of the caucus, and then just letting the House work. You know, we don't need a speaker that comes in there and specifically pushes or kills legislation. We need a speaker that will let the members work their bills and let the process work. And with Representative Bonham, we feel confident that's going to happen.
Let's see if we can look at maybe some of the social issues and then some of the economic ones. Social issues, I think anybody that goes to your website, we do have a link there, colehefner.com. I think, so you've been endorsed by Texas Right to Life, Concerned Women for America, Conservative Republicans of Texas, Young Conservatives of Texas. So on the social issues, you're 100% pro-life. Is there anything that can be done in this legislative session that might also advance the pro-life agenda, since you've had a couple of judicial rulings that have gone the wrong way? Is there anything that might be able to happen this time in this legislation?
You know, that's the pro-life issue is probably the number one issue that got me involved in the political process. Me and my wife, we have 4 boys and 3 girls. We have 7 kids, and so that's an issue that's near and dear to our hearts. And if you don't get that one right, you know, the rest of them don't really matter. And so that's kind of the driving force behind why we got involved in the first place. And so we're always looking for ways to slow the rate of abortion with the end goal of ending abortion altogether. I'd like to see, you know, Roe v. Wade eventually overturned, and stop all abortions. And so we're always looking for ways that we can increase awareness. And on the same hand, we need to, be providing support for these young mothers that get into situations that are very difficult, and sometimes they may not be able to see a way out. And so we need to have programs in place that show them there are people out there and there are avenues other than just terminating a life there. And so there's several issues that we'll be looking into to try to advance that cause.
Let me also talk about another issue that I know you really believe in, and that's Second Amendment. I know that you're a strong defender in the Second Amendment, lifetime member of the NRA, also have your concealed carry license, as do I. So, again, there have been some questions, not so much in the state of Texas, but in other states where there has been an attempt to try to limit our Second Amendment rights. So what kind of legislation or what kind of initiatives do you think might take place in this next legislative session?
We had one, there's the bill that gets the most, the gun bill that gets the most attention seems to be constitutional carry or permitless carry. And
yes.
Don't know what the political will be for that to push through there. I'm for it. I'm comfortable with it. But we specifically, last session, we had a specific bill come from our district, and a teacher had come to us and said, "Hey, man, when I go to school to work, and my wife also teaches, a lot of times we're up here late at night, and by the time we get home, it's late in the evening, and the schools prohibit us, school employees, from carrying a firearm in our vehicles." And so I said, "Man, there's no way, so I said, let me check into this." And so sure enough, he was correct.
Wow.
And so we carried a bill that said, okay, schools, you cannot prohibit school employees from carrying a firearm in their vehicle if they have a license. And so we didn't get that bill passed as a standalone bill, but we did get it done as an amendment to another bill. And but now we've got some blowback where people are saying, okay, fine, you can carry your gun, but it has to be unloaded and in a locked box and all these things. So we're going to make another run at it and say, look, an empty gun is about as useful as a stick, so a stick may be more useful. But so we're going to clean that up, make another run at it, and then we'll be looking at other things. And so we have a good relationship with the NRA, the TSRA, and the other gun rights activists in the state. And so we're always looking for ways to either advance gun rights or at least protect them at the minimum.
Let me, just before I take a break, maybe get the big issue, and that is whenever I talk to individuals, and I'm sure when you were out campaigning, everybody wants to know about property tax reform. Any possibility of anything significant in terms of property tax reform in this legislative session?
Yes, and when I'm going around talking to folks, I hear, 2 or 3 of the top main things. One is border security, but probably the most talked about issue is property taxes and the burden that's placing on our businesses and our homeowners in my area and all across the state. And so I do believe that we're going to see some significant advances in that area, and we need to, as Republicans, we believe in lower taxes and private property rights and home ownership and all those things. And we're in control, and the people sent us down there to do a job, and I think we need to do it. We need to do some big things. There's a lot of different opinions and a lot of different approaches to go about it, but I think we need to do something big this session, and I think we will.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, you, of course, already mentioned something I wanted to get to, and that is, of course, we are looking right now at a shutdown of at least part of the federal government over building a wall. A comment today from the president in one of his tweets about being maybe even forced to close down the southern border until something passes, maybe even cutting off aid to Central America. And, of course, that's at the federal level, but I also know that you have some things to say about securing and defending our border, but also about whether or not we should stop handouts to people who are here illegally. So we're going to continue our conversation with Cole Hefner, and if you find yourself saying, well, I like some of the issues he's addressing, or I'd like to know more about what he plans to do in the next legislative session. Of course, we have information on our website, pointofview.net, or you can just go to his website, colehefner.com, and find out a little bit more. But we'll come back and talk about the issue that we're talking about nationally, the issue we'll be talking about with Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos in just a few minutes. But what can the state of Texas do? We'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Over 3 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples. The ruling has resulted in all states being required to perform and recognize same-sex marriages. This was a 5-4 decision along liberal-conservative ideological lines. The swing vote was now retired Justice Anthony Kennedy. He wrote the opinion for the majority. It turns out Justice Kennedy's thinking had little to do with the Constitution. He sat down recently with Bloomberg TV host David Rubenstein and revealed that for him, Obergefell v. Hodges was more of a policy preference than a decision based on constitutional reasoning. Justice Kennedy is Catholic. He stated in this interview that because of his religious beliefs, he surprised himself in coming to this decision. He said he was concerned about correcting an injustice for the future. He brought up adoption by gay couples, saying, "As I thought about this, and I thought about it more and more, it seemed wrong, unconstitutional to say that over 100,000 adopted children could not have their parents married. But redefining marriage deprives those children of one biological parent. That's constitutional?" Justice Kennedy also told host David Rubenstein that your duty in every case is to ask why you are doing what you're about to do. But where's the part about a justice's duty to interpret the Constitution? Family Research Council's Peter Spriggs sums up Justice Kennedy's role in this ruling. He decided he thought it was a good idea, so he decided to impose it on the country. So glad he's off the court. Maybe someday a court will return the definition of marriage to the one we had for millennia, that does so much good in a society. But in 2019, we can move forward on marriage. In this post-Obergefell climate, we must explain how natural marriage preserves a healthy culture and enact policies that support and encourage it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Really stay with us for just a few more minutes. Representative Cole Hefner, representing House District 5. And Cole, for just a minute, let's, if we can, talk about the border. I recognize that primarily the responsibility is the federal government, but I think there is a place for what can be done in the state of Texas. And I know that you have talked about the need to defend, and really first to secure and defend the border. And then I also want to get into the other question about some of the handouts. But are there some things that the state of Texas can do to defend our southern border?
Yeah, there is. And we have spent, hundreds of millions of Texas taxpayer dollars to help in securing and defending the border. And you're right, we're somewhat limited in what we can do. But we can put state troopers down there. We can have a stronger law enforcement presence and serve as a deterrent. And we can put aircraft and sensors and cameras and all kinds of things, which is what we've been doing for the last 2 or 4 years. And so it has helped. It has slowed the crossings coming into our country illegally. And I had the opportunity a couple of years ago to go down and tour the border with some legislators, and Congressman Gohmert was there, and with Border Patrol and Texas Highway Patrol, and it was really amazing to see how open the border was. And we were in the McAllen area where
That's right.
The river is wide and deep, and where there's a lot of people, and so it was pretty eye opening to see that there's not a whole lot keeping people from just crossing over. And you have a lot of scrub brush, a lot of underbrush on both sides of the border that people can hide in and use as a way to travel up up into our state, and so it was pretty incredible to see. So it's a little bit frustrating, to have to spend Texas taxpayer dollars that we could be using to build roads or put into our schools or whatever we could do. But we must secure that border, because you have not only people coming over for asylum and these things, but we have a lot of gang activity, drugs, child sex trafficking, and all kinds of problems. And it just makes sense to have a secure border. You've got to have a secure border.
Well, the other part of that is the attraction. Why would people come here? And so I'd love to get your comments as well about the fact that we have some sanctuary cities. Now, I don't think Sulphur Springs or Mount Pleasant are sanctuary cities, but you know as well as I do that in the state of Texas, we eventually have some sanctuary cities. Sure. And then I know you've also said, well, if we stop giving handouts to individuals that are here illegally, then it's going to be a lot more difficult and maybe a lot less attractive for people to try to sneak across the border. What are your thoughts?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, we got to do whatever we can do. And we want people to come here the right way. And we want them to come as Americans, not to turn America into wherever they came from. There's a reason that they want to come over here. And I don't blame them. I mean, I would too, but there's a way to go about that. And so we have it to where people just come across the border and then get all kinds of medical help and different things that is really straining our system. And so that's why, I'm 100% for the border wall. And because, you can't, it's hard to fix the problem when there's a wide open border down there. So we've got to seal it off so that we can then go attack these other issues and get things like they should be. So, but yeah, the handouts and the magnets and stuff need to be done away with. I agree.
Sure. Just one more question before I let you go, and that is, you're a small business owner, and you recognize that a lot of people in the state of Texas are able to start businesses. There's lower tax burden, lower regulation, but we have more and more people moving from other states because they like this economic environment, but we need to educate them as to why they wanted to come here in the first place. And so I do believe there's going to be some pressure on you in the next legislative session to increase state government spending, increase the number of regulations. I suspect that you're going to be there to try to warn people about the consequences of doing those kinds of things.
You bet, absolutely. There's a reason that people want to come here, and we want to keep it that way. And I believe in the free market. I believe that the free market can figure these things out. If you look at the advancement of technology just look at Amazon and your smartphones and these different things that have come about because of the free market. Somebody was able to go out and come up with an idea and present that to the people. And, a lot of times people didn't even know there was a need for these things or know that they wanted these services. And so, there's always that desire by some to quote regulate, and to regulate is supposed to be to make regular, to make to make it consistent. But so many times regulations are very constraining on business growth. I've had people that I've helped through issues with TCEQ and Texas Department of Insurance and just little things, and it's amazing. One of my constituents, Kerby, built a gas station, bought a gas station, and just to get his gas station to change the ownership from the previous owner to him, he has alcohol sales there and tobacco and fuel, and the amount of permits that they had to go through was just incredible. I mean, he's got to have like 22 permits or something like that. That's just crazy. And then he's got property tax challenges with the local county. And so there's a lot of, while it is the best place in the country to do business, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. Not only would I not live anywhere but Texas, I wouldn't live anywhere but East Texas. but we still have some work to do there. And so anytime that, and I've lived those challenges my entire adult life, which has not been all that long. I'm still relatively young, but yeah, we need to keep the business climate free. And then, remind these folks that are coming in here that there's a reason Texas is prospering, and we want to keep it that way.
Well, Representative Cole Hefner, again, I hope you will call upon us as the legislative session unfolds, because if nothing else, we're going to be watching what's taking place there. We've had a chance to talk with a number of state senators and state representatives, and thank you so very much for joining us today here on Point of View, and Happy New Year.
Absolutely. You bet. Happy New Year. Thanks for having me on.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will get into our roundtable discussion with Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos. And let me just mention, as we do that we, of course, have posted quite a number of articles. We're going to be talking about the shutdown, as you might imagine. We're going to be talking about religious liberty. That certainly is the case. We'll get into maybe a little bit of a discussion about Syria and a couple of other topics. And, of course, the immigration issue is front and center right now, so that's where we'll spend some of our time. But as we encourage you to go to the website to find those articles, I also want to encourage you to go to the website to click on the banner that says Give Boldly, because this is the last Friday of 2018, the last time in which we'll do weekend edition on this 2018 year. And so we are asking those of you that have been waiting to the very end of the year to give. And if you can give generously, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, you can click on the banner, and that is a way that you can give. And it's very simple to do. And as I've mentioned already on a number of occasions, but let me mention again, we have a matching fund. That means if you would like to give $100, it essentially becomes $200. $500 could become $1,000. And so I've seen some people that have been willing to give some significant gifts, as well as others that want to give small gifts. And you can decide how you would like to give to us, but I hope that you would. We're looking hopefully for much greater participation than we normally receive. So if you have never given before, let me encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. Or if you say, I don't have a computer in front of me, or I'd like to talk to someone, the number to call is 800-347-5151, 1-800-347-5151, and you can give certainly over the phone. And so either way, we would encourage you to do so. Let's take a break, though. We'll have a chance to talk with Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford right after these important messages.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View radio talk show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is our weekend edition, and it really is kind of the year in review. We will have a formal year in review on Monday, but this is the last Friday in 2018. So in some respects, we are going to look back on a couple of issues and certainly look ahead to some other issues. And in studio with us, Kelly Shackelford, of course, President and CEO of First Liberty Institute, Debbie Georgatos, author and talk show host. And we are certainly going to get into some of the issues related to religious liberty and Syria and the rest. But I thought that the big issue this morning is a tweet coming from Donald Trump, which says, "We will be forced to close the southern border entirely if the obstructionist Democrats do not give us the money to finish the wall and also change the ridiculous immigration laws that our country is saddled with." And then later on suggested that, you know, this shutdown may last a long time. Some are suggesting this shutdown could last until President Donald Trump gives the State of the Union speech, which is January 22nd. So, and he's saying, well, the Democrats are hurting their fellow Democrats because most of the people not working right now are Democrats. That was kind of interesting line. He's always got a shot there. But Kelly, let me come to you for just a minute. We've been through some shutdowns, but I get the sense this one is not going to just last days. This one might last weeks. What do you think?
So. I mean, look, you've got this weird situation where the president ran and was elected on doing this. And it's a really small thing. It's $5 billion out of a $1.6 trillion budget. I mean, it's like again, if people wrote all these numbers out, it's like a rounding area. I mean, it's not a lot of money in the budget. And yet it's probably the number one thing that he was elected on. And so why wouldn't the Democrats give it to him? The only reason is they don't want to give him anything. It's like, it's not about the issue. It's not like they have some huge deal that if he gets $5 billion for the wall, it'll really do anything that bothers him. It's just that their base doesn't want them to give him anything. And so it's a weird situation. That's a weird reason to be shutting down the government. And I'm not sure how it's going to end. And it's sort of a little bit of a picture of why and how dysfunctional our government is. That people, instead of doing things for what is best for the American people, are all about their own political interests and playing games and all these things. And I wish there would be a massive and fair polling of the country, because I think if you ask most people, they want border security. They want, and we say wall. It's not really a wall. They want the little steel slats in the parts of the border where they're needed, and they want there to be an orderly process for people coming into the country. And it's chaos right now, and it's because the politicians don't want to fix the problem, or at least a number of them don't want to fix the problem.
Look at the number of people. I mean, we're now into the tens of millions in the GoFundMe campaign to build a wall, which is just another issue we'll get to in just a minute. But Debbie, what's your thoughts? Because already, by the way, phone calls are coming in. So if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. I knew we'd have some people talking about this issue today. What's your thoughts?
I think that it is accurate that this shutdown will last probably much longer even than the State of the Union address. And the reason is, I agree wholeheartedly with Kelly Shackelford that the American left does not want to give Donald Trump one victory, especially a significant victory that was kind of his signature item in his campaign. But I also think even deeper on the Democrat side, there is an ideological embrace of the idea that there's a globalism, nationalism mindset on the American left, embraced by many people in the higher ranks of the Democrat Party. And a wall or securing a border is a counter to the idea of globalism. It's a reassertion of nationalism and valuing America. Kind of the one of the other big themes of the Trump campaign was we're going to value and America first means we're going to value the American people. So I think the left doesn't want the signal that they're agreeing that we have to have a national identity that requires, as Kelly accurately said, it's not a border across sea to sea across the southern U.S. border. It is a wall of some kind where other security cannot guarantee that the border is secure, other forms of security. So I think it will go on. I think the legitimate polling that Kelly we wish we could find, I think that would lead to the American people agreeing not to a wall everywhere, but to a secure border. And the other point on the American left that seems to just push this agenda on their side is the notion that they have pushed relentlessly and repeatedly for the amnesty for the Dreamers and the DACA people and the other legal aliens here. There's a notion that just let them all be citizens. And I think that plays into the left-wing notion of weak border, people pouring in, keep legitimizing them. You really end up distilling isn't the right word I'm trying to say. You end up loosening or weakening the idea of what American citizenship matters, which the left loves. They want a bunch of citizens who will vote Democrat. That is the long-term, high-level political agenda, in my opinion.
So again, balkanization. Now, some people might say, well, what about a compromise? And so far, the compromise haven't worked very well, because you might remember that the request from the Trump administration is about $5.7 billion, and the original offer on the table from Chuck Schumer was $1.6 billion. Then he rotated it down to $1.3 billion. Compromise supposed to go the other way. And now you have Mike Pence, who this week actually offered a compromise, and the response from the Democrat Party was no comment at all. Not yes, no, we'll talk about it. I mean, so it's almost like both sides are really kind of digging in their heels right now.
The Democrats do not want a deal. They think they have their base on their side. They think they have the sympathy of the Hispanic American vote, which I think they're wrong about, but they think that that's a winning issue for them. They don't want to compromise. And if Trump gives them something, as he did previously on immigration, that gave him pretty much everything they wanted, and they said no. They think they're grandstanding to embarrass President Trump, and I don't think the Democrats have ever encountered a president like President Trump. He is not going to back down.
I don't think this thing stops, I might be wrong, until there's polling that convinces them that they're being harmed. And, I think when that comes out, we'll see, people start to deal. But right now, they think, the old deal of blame the shutdown. Whoever gets blamed for the shutdown gets all the negative. And I mean, I don't think that works anymore. I think everybody's looking at this like, well, what are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And you look at both sides and you say, okay, Trump wants this wall for border security, and whatever you think of that, it's like, okay, well, I understand that. And then, well, why exactly won't they do that? Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's a lot of good rationale coming back. Well, it won't work. I guess your walls don't work, and, of course walls work, and we're not talking about walls anyway. We're talking about border security. It could be steel slats and all these different choices. So I just think it's sad, but until it becomes clear that the American people are kind of, upset with what's going on, and especially one side, I don't think there'll be any dealing.
I might just mention one of the articles we've posted was the myths about federal shutdown, because this is a partial shutdown. 75% of the government is funded, including the Defense Department. And some people say, what about the Coast Guard? Because they're in Homeland Security. Well, they will still be there. The post office is still functioning. If people called last week, Social Security checks are still going out. Veterans checks are going out. A number of other things. But some of the people working in that 1/4 of the federal bureaucracy might not get their January 11th checks. So we'll see where that goes, and we'll take some phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we've heard quite a bit these days about fake news, but what about fake science? That is the title of a book by Austin Ruse. He has served as the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights, where he testifies to our government and the United Nations about important issues. He was on my radio program recently to talk about some of the misinformation and false information presented in the media and in various governmental hearings. Some of the book deals with homosexuality and the transgender issue. One chapter addresses whether homosexuals are born that way and whether orientations are immutable. In other words, can people change their sexual orientation? Another chapter addresses the studies that attempt to argue that there is no difference between traditional parents and homosexual parents rearing children. This grand experiment on children has been detrimental to their physical and psychological health. That is why he wanted to set the record straight. Some states have very strict labeling laws for food. Even a minuscule amount of a naturally occurring chemical must have a warning label. But Austin Ruse points out that in order to hit the cancer target zone for acrylamide, a child would have to eat 182 pounds of French fries every single day. A teenager wouldn't even do that on a dare. For decades, Austin Ruse has been testifying on pro-life issues. He reminds us in one chapter that nearly everything the secular media and pro-abortion groups say about abortion is a lie. The same could be said about these groups and what they say about sex education. And he laments how the population control advocates are driving many countries towards a demographic winner. I recommend you read the book, and if you're skeptical of the claims, check out the more than 40 pages of endnotes documenting his critique of fake science. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos and Kelly Shackelford in studio with us today. Let's go out to Texas KBJS. Ann, I think you have a suggestion. Would love to hear it.
Well, thank you. Yes. I would like to suggest that instead of the wall, we would negotiate a lease with Mexico for the first 100 kilometers into their country from our entire southern border. And we would pay for that lease with the money we're already, I think it's something like 17 million or who knows, that we just send to them free, use that money to lease the land for 100 years, whatever we can negotiate. And then on that property, build factories, build homes, build things that where we can hire the Mexicans to work in those factories and help them to help themselves to get their economy going again.
Well,
and
one of the things that has been worked at is just to try to get something going on in Mexico. Of course, now more and more of these caravans are not coming from Mexico because Mexico is doing a little bit better. They're coming from El Salvador, Costa Rica, Honduras, things like that. Interesting. Let's take another phone call real quickly. In California, Jose, what would you like to add to our conversation?
So, in the past, the Berlin Wall, Great Wall of China. I mean, walls, they're a waste of money. Our country's in a huge deficit. We used to talk about it all the time, and now we just, hey, spend $5 billion on a wall. I know it sounds like a rounding error, but, there's people that are struggling to make ends meet, and, this president seems to just, like to make things bankrupt.
Okay. Any comments?
Well, in terms of security, the walls you mentioned, they did effectuate the purpose intended. They don't solve the internal problems of either country. You know, the Berlin Wall didn't solve communism. It didn't make the communists live freely, but it created it served the purpose for which it was intended. Walls aren't going to do anything to fix the internal problems. But in terms of you're describing the people's need who are trying to come here for jobs, for economic well-being. America is a very generous country with immigration, and maybe we need to decide we're going to let more, especially impoverished. I don't think we should change our policy and let more impoverished immigrants come to America. That's already probably a too high percentage of our immigration population, but in any case, the problems you're addressing, they're really two separate issues. One is, does a wall make security better? And there's no question it does historically. But the question of whether we should, as American citizens, have a different policy in immigration, more low-income immigrants welcomed, more aid to low-income countries, those can all be debated. But they don't really mean a wall doesn't work.
You know, one of the things I've noticed in some of these debates, and I was reading this in USA Today, so that means it must be true, that the arguments against the wall, because Kelly and I go back and forth, what is the argument? And one of the arguments was, well, 40% of the people that are here illegally came from overstaying visas. Okay, we've said that on the program many times before. And that has nothing to do with the wall. That's a different issue, that actually the immigration is down. Okay, that may be true at the moment, but it won't be true in the future. You know, there are times, Kelly, when you've done debates, I've done debates, you've probably done moot court and things like that. You just say, that's not a very good argument, and that's what I'm looking for. Okay, what is the compelling argument to say why a very small amount of money in a couple of very strategic locations might actually be more helpful to border security?
They're not making arguments. You know, the best they have is a wall won't work or something like that. Of course, the wall works. A wall works for its intended purpose. And there are parts of our border. I mean, we clearly have people running across the border because they're unsecured, and so we need. It's a matter of security and securing the border, like people do their property, and like everybody's done from the history. And go back and read in the Bible about fences and borders. I mean, it's been in place for a long time, and of course it works, as long as you think of what your purpose is, right? I mean, if you think it's some sort of miracle nirvana thing, no, it doesn't, change that. But you do need security on our border. I do. The other thing the caller said that I would say, though, is I think if you can criticize Donald Trump for a lot of things, I don't think you can criticize him for being bad on the economy. I mean, he turned the economy around. It's our GDP has been just incredible. In addition to the tax cuts, more money in people's pocket. I think the highest ever now household income in the history of the country, lowest unemployment rates in the history of the country in numerous different communities. African American, Hispanic, etc. So again, people cannot like Donald Trump for a lot of reasons. I mean, his tweets, his boorishness, his even on policy. But I think to say that, well, how dare he spend $5 billion on the border wall, which is the number one thing he really campaigned on, because he's hurting people economically. I don't think that works. He's done an incredible job on the economic side, reduced regulations, etc. That's led to really an explosion in all that, the trillions of dollars that were brought back into the country because they got rid of all those bad laws that was punishing corporations. And it's just led to a booming economy. But I think, if you're looking at a huge $1.6 trillion budget, and the guy who's president ran, and again, I think the number one thing that he promised the voters was the wall, and that you don't want him to have $5 billion out of $1.6 trillion to do the border security that he promised. I'm not seeing any good arguments that are being made that are substantive at all.
The other, go ahead.
You're going, no, good. That's fine.
The other quick thing on the wall is that in addition to truly making it less possible for people to cross the southern border and enter America illegally, which, if you can't walk through a wall, that does stop you. But it's also symbolic to people, not just in Mexico, but you mentioned, Kerby, the caravan of the people trying to enter America from Honduras and El Salvador and Guatemala. If word spreads, as word did originally, what brought the caravan here, the word spread was, we're gonna flood the border, we're gonna all show up, they're gonna let us in, they're gonna give us all asylum. If word spreads, there's actually a big wall, and you can't get in unless they have a unless you meet their standards, their laws, their asylum practices, that whole thing changes. The dynamics change of the incentive of people to even try to come here.
And look, I want to be clear about something. I think a lot of people think of a wall and they, again, not a lot, but I mean, there's a percentage of people in America that when you say wall, they think you're trying to keep people out. It's like you're excluding people or whatever. No, a wall is not a wall everywhere. There's an entry point, okay?
Several.
Yeah, and all we're trying to do is make things orderly so that we know who's coming in the country and we actually are in control of the process. I mean, it's no different from having a door on your house. I mean, people shouldn't be, coming through the windows and the other parts. You actually have walls and then you have a door. And that's what we're trying to do with our country so that we know. I mean, there are all kinds of people who would like to come here for bad reasons. In addition to the fact, but it's created chaos, and the politicians have really created a problem. I mean, in the last 2 years, the increased number of asylum requests, just because of the chaos, 2,000% increase.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just insane, and it shows that this is being gamed, that there's this message that is being sent out, come manipulate our system. You know what? I think just the other day they let loose how many illegal immigrants in California? I think it was 500 or something like that. They just let them go.
Can't handle them all.
Yeah, and so
catch and release.
It's really irresponsible what our politicians are doing, and that this isn't this is easily be solvable. I think any other Americans, if they had this problem in their community or whatever, they would sit down, they would find the solution, and they would create an orderly process. People can disagree about how many should come in, how we should pick who comes in, and et cetera. But I think everybody should be able to agree on that we want an orderly process, and border security is necessary to have that orderly process.
Amen.
Go ahead. One more
Said
time.
amen.
Yeah, amen. Okay. Just before we take a break, let me just mention that we're coming to year end, so this is an opportunity for you. If you have not supported Point of View, we have a banner here, and it is something that we've really encouraged you to consider what you might do so we can end this year end in the black. About $65,000 matching fund. So that means your gift of $100 becomes $200, $500 becomes $1,000. And when we come back, we'll take some more phone calls. But as we go to a break, this is a great opportunity for you to go to the website, click on that banner, and that's a way in which you can give us and leave with us your year-end gift. Let me also mention that if you'd like to talk to someone, this will be a different number than the on-air number. That number is 800-347-5151. And when we come back, we'll take a few more phone calls. And I do want to get into religious liberty, because not only do I encourage you to support Point of View, I also encourage you to support the First Liberty Institute. And I even have my check right here. So again, I certainly believe in what Kelly Shackelford is doing, and I encourage you to support them. But also hope you'll support us here at Point of View, as we will be talking in just a few minutes about some of these religious liberty cases, some successes this year, some real significant matters for prayer next year. So we'll come back and take a few more phone calls, get into a little bit of an update on this issue of religious liberty. All that coming up right after these important messages.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Weekend edition. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. In just a minute, we're going to talk about religious liberty, but let me pick up a few other phone calls here from the previous segment. And again, Kelly Shackelford, Debbie Georgatos with us, and we'll go to Tammy in Ohio, WGGN. Tammy, what's your point of view?
My point of view, sir, first I want to say have a blessed and happy New Year to everybody.
Thank you.
And I say build that wall and leave Trump alone. That is my president. It's your president, and he's doing a great job. He went to Iraq and Germany to visit our troops. Really? I think kudos to him. Hats off to him. Build the daggone wall and leave him alone.
I think we know what she thinks on that. By the way, while we're talking about that, NBC was really upset that Donald Trump would be the first president since 2002 to not visit the troops at about the time he's landing there. And so then everybody's saying, well, that's just because we were criticizing him, so he decided to go. I love what Dan Bongino, I quoted that the other day, said, look, Dan Bongino used to be in the Secret Service, says, this is not something you think about overnight. This is something you plan weeks and weeks in advance. But nevertheless, you just can't win with this, can you?
And then the I don't know if we're going to talk about this later. What I think we've got the article linked at pointofview.net.
We've got them all. Yeah.
The fact that this story comes out, that this soldier comes up to the president and says, you're becoming president is why I enlisted. And there's really, I think, sweet story. And it's the kind of thing you would see with Barack Obama, certainly anything else. Immediately, CNN, he signed a hat. He violated. Trump signed a hat and gave him a hat. And this guy said positive things about Trump. And so he's engaged in partisanship. And you're not allowed to do that in the military. All this stuff. And by the way, which they were wrong about. But they tried to. This is the thing that I think drives people crazy. It's what they call the Trump derangement syndrome, right? The media is so nuts that they can't even cover something in a normal way, and everybody looks at this and goes, "You people have lost your mind." Criticizing, a soldier for, saying something nice to the president because that makes him partisan, and that he can't be partisan. He can't be pro our president.
He has to be loyal to the commander-in-chief, but he can't like that.
That's right. It's like so bizarre. And I would say this, our caller is obviously very pro-Trump. And my point about this border wall is I don't care if you're pro-Trump or not. You should look at this and go, let's say you're anti-Trump, but, look at your fellow countrymen. They elected the president to do something. I think it's good for all of us that when we elect somebody to do something, we'd like to see them do it. How about having some politicians that when a majority of people elect them and say, we want you to do this, how about let's see some people do that? And so just look at it as not like, I don't see it as you're supporting Trump. You're supporting these Americans that thought that doing these border security measures would make a difference. If you think it won't make a difference, let them do it, and let's show that it doesn't make any difference. But let's get past this so that we can get to the bigger issues. Let him fulfill his promise. Let him do this. I do think border security is a good thing for all of us. But the real problem is they don't want to deal with the real issue and solve the issue of immigration and how orderly to do it. And until they do that, we're going to continue to have problems.
When we had a newly elected Barack Obama, he wanted to pass something for shovel-ready projects, which turned out to not be so shovel-ready. But that was $1 trillion, not $5 billion. Right. And for anybody that's interested, we may come back to this later, but if not, the fourth article is one that I've entitled Coverage of Trump's Trip to the Troops. And it has some things from Sarah Sanders' response to CNN and all the rest. And we've mentioned that this week, but if you would like to have it's almost a 6-page summary of the back and forth, the finger pointing, the criticism, and all the rest. I think this article, it's the fourth article on our website, you could read and pass it on to some others if you find yourself engaging in a conversation about the trip that the president and first lady took to the military.
There was also a lot of shocking scandal around the idea that Melania Trump wore some particular kind of boots, at some appearance in Iraq. I have to say, I first of all think that it is a little more serious as Washington Post and other left-wing media coverage of criticizing Trump for not visiting Iraq or the troops, and then for visiting them, or what the reasons. I think they really end up hurting themselves. I think the American people watch some of the left-wing media, and no matter what Trump does, as I say, if he solved cancer tomorrow, they would criticize him for putting research doctors out of business. I mean, there is nothing he can do right. And the thing is, you start to wonder, or people start to wonder, well, if they're so biased against him, they can't even cover his visit to the troops with any sense of fairness and accuracy. Why should I believe anything they cover about his policies, his desires? I think they really hurt themselves, and I think it's become transparent to many in the American public. The media is just not going to give the guy a break.
Can you imagine how Melania Trump would be treated if if the press were actually acting more normally, or let's say she was the wife of a Democrat president or
She'd
whatever.
She'd be the style icon, just like Michelle Obama was.
Well, I mean, I think it'd be more than that. She is obviously, she's internationally known for her beauty and her fashion and everything. I mean, it's a Jackie O kind of situation. I mean, she would be, and then add to that she speaks 5 languages, and she was a very successful businesswoman, and I can't imagine how she would be, lifted up. And it's just bizarre that they so hate Trump that they can't even treat her nice. I mean, I don't get that either. But I like the way she is presenting herself on behalf of our country. Just the way she's being very. She's not. She's not being a loudmouth or anything like that. She's being very respectful in all ways. I think the way she's dressing and everything is she represents the country really well. The way she reacts with people is really well. I think she's been a great model for how she's been. So it's bizarre to see these types of things where they want to criticize what boot she's wearing or what dress she's wearing and then make some big deal about it. Again, I can't I can't help but think of how different this would be. And it shows the bias. And I think it's so sad. Journalism used to be, at least the attempt was to be objective. And we've really lost that. And I think that's a huge loss. And I hope maybe a younger generation will take that back or something. And there might even be a free market opportunity there. Let's say you started a newsroom or a network or something, and you said
journalism school. Sorry.
Yeah, and we're gonna actually hire based upon ideology. In other words, we're going to have we're going to have Republican mindset, Democrat mindset, moderate, libertarian. We're going to have all these things balanced so that we don't do things without realizing we're being biased because somebody else is saying, hey, wait a second, you can't say that. If we ever had a network or whatever on the news, just a news network that did that, I think people would really watch that and look for their news there. And I think they would make a lot of money. But it's sad to watch these kinds of things that's going on. Attacking a soldier because he's supporting the president of the United States. When would we ever thought we would see that in our lifetime? I never did.
Well, again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll go to South Carolina, WLPG. Brian, what's on your mind for us today? I'd love to hear your comments.
I'm calling about theater. Theater is not my specialty, especially political theater. How will this standoff in the House play out in the next Congress when the first order of business will be to impeach President Trump and to magnify the Mueller investigation mudslinging? How long can 4 Rhino senators resist the siren call of the Democrats to send the House, the ship of state, onto the rocks?
Yeah. What about this idea of an impeachment?
Well, I think
here we go.
We'll see how smart the Democrats are. Sometimes they can't. I think the first time I saw this, really, the Democrats used to be a lot smarter politically than the Republicans. But now they've got a base that's kind of frothing at the mouth to such an extent that they really are not being smart in a lot of ways. One of the most obvious ones to me was when Gorsuch came up and the filibuster was still in place for Supreme Court. and Gorsuch is about as qualified a Supreme Court justice as you'll ever find. I mean, he'd written all these opinions. He was well respected across the aisle.
Yeah.
And yet they were like, and so they would be smart to go, okay, this is not the one to really push a filibuster because we're going to look ridiculous. But their base insisted upon it. They did. So guess what happened? Filibuster's now gone because it was so irrational. And so I think if they're smart, they don't do the impeachment thing. They do all kinds of investigations, which I think they're going to do. And they try to investigate everything, and they try to make a lot of press out of that. But if you look back at what happened under President Clinton, when the House was controlled by Republicans and they did the impeachment, it backfired heavily. The American people did not like them spending their time on that. And when the re-election occurred, Clinton won in a landslide because of that impeachment and what the House was doing.
We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Over 3 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples. The ruling has resulted in all states being required to perform and recognize same-sex marriages. This was a 5-4 decision along liberal-conservative ideological lines. The swing vote was now retired Justice Anthony Kennedy. He wrote the opinion for the majority. It turns out Justice Kennedy's thinking had little to do with the Constitution. He sat down recently with Bloomberg TV host David Rubenstein and revealed that for him, Obergefell v. Hodges was more of a policy preference than a decision based on constitutional reasoning. Justice Kennedy is Catholic. He stated in this interview that because of his religious beliefs, he surprised himself in coming to this decision. He said he was concerned about correcting an injustice for the future. He brought up adoption by gay couples, saying, "As I thought about this, and I thought about it more and more, it seemed wrong, unconstitutional to say that over 100,000 adopted children could not have their parents married. But redefining marriage deprives those children of one biological parent. That's constitutional?" Justice Kennedy also told host David Rubenstein that your duty in every case is to ask why you are doing what you're about to do. But where's the part about a justice's duty to interpret the Constitution? Family Research Council's Peter Spriggs sums up Justice Kennedy's role in this ruling. He decided he thought it was a good idea, so he decided to impose it on the country. So glad he's off the court. Maybe someday a court will return the definition of marriage to the one we had for millennia, that does so much good in a society. But in 2019, we can move forward on marriage. In this post-Obergefell climate, we must explain how natural marriage preserves a healthy culture and enact policies that support and encourage it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Kelly Shackelford, Debbie Georgatos. Before we get back to the phones, though, I did want to talk a little bit about religious liberty. We're coming to the end of a year, and this has been a pretty good year, Kelly, for religious liberty. I've seen some of your list. I've seen some by Family Research Council, Alliance Defending Freedom. And so we've got a few things that we can really celebrate, and then some major prayer requests for this next year, because you'll have the oral arguments in February for your case, right?
Yes, really good year. A lot of victories this year. We had a victory not even talked about a lot. It was so quick, but 9-0 victory at the Supreme Court in the Marianne Sauce case, which was, believe it or not, a woman who was told by police she was not allowed to pray in her own home, and so that was a good victory. The victories with the chaplain cases, we had Chaplain Squires being one of those. It's just incredible what our chaplains are going through at times. The political correctness that is not fully, but in spots has seeped into our military to try to really intimidate our chaplains, and we don't ever want that to happen. But that was a really strong victory. And you just think about a number of the Coons cheerleaders case. That was a victory. We could go through a bunch of these. You had the Kelvin Cochran case, the fire chief in Atlanta was a win. The Jack Phillips case at the Supreme Court, Kate Baker, although they kind of skipped the issue, they at least issued a ruling that was good for free exercise of religion. So a lot of really good things. And then just the judges in the last, year that we've gotten on the court. I mean, a lot of excellent judges up and down. I mean, not just people notice the Supreme Court, but I'm talking about the lower court judges. These are I'll just say this because most people I'm sure don't know anything about these judges, but I focus on that. This is the best judicial appointments in the history of our country. We've never had this quality before. And and it's also, by the way, the youngest ever appointed in the history of the country. So they will be on the court for a long time following the Constitution. And so huge, huge, huge. And then, as you say, I've never been more excited about what I think is about to occur in 2019. Our case at the Supreme Court, which will be argued in late February, the American Legion case, it's not only about a veterans memorial and all veterans memorials, and I think everybody needs to pay attention to this case, and everybody will get that. But what's going on underneath is even more long-term impact, and that is how we're going to approach the religion clauses. For over 50 years, we've had justices that strayed away from the Constitution, started making up phrases and tests that weren't what the Constitution said, and it's created really a society where the government is almost hostile to religion. So if you see religion in public or near the government, it's almost people get fearful. They think they need to shut it down. That is not what our founders ever meant to do. And I really think this case there's a really good opportunity that that's going to change now that we have justices. We have a majority of justices who want to follow the Constitution. And so I think that case is going to be huge. And then I think there's 155 judicial seats waiting to be filled. And the Senate changed. It's not 51-49 with Flake on there and all this. It's now 53-47. And it's probably more strong or more conservative Republicans that were on there before. So add that to the fact that the Senate's really not going to be able to do anything else other than judges and confirmations, because the House, and it's not like there's any legislation that's going to come from the Democratic House that the Senate's going to be, pushing through. So really their focus will be on getting these confirmations through. So I think this is going to be really, I look at 2019 as a small window of time that's going to affect literally decades, if not a generation. I mean, so the future impact from this is the pebble in the water that is going to go for a long time. And I don't know if people realize what's coming, but I'm really excited. I think we're going to get back to the religious freedom that our country was founded upon. And I think that we're going to start having a lot of excellent judges go through that are going to be in the court for a long time. And this is really about future generations, what's going to happen.
Let me just mention, I say this every once in a while, that when people go to your website, it's firstliberty.org, upper right-hand corner, click on resources, then click on judicial nominees, and you will then see all the possible nominees for the circuit court and the district court. So I want to give everybody an opportunity to go to First Liberty today. You can just click on the picture where Kelly is, go to resources, then judicial nominees, and that'll have you give you a sense of what's happening, because we pay attention to the Supreme Court. but you know what's going down here.
Yes.
And that's kind of the bench strength. That's the farm club for the future Supreme Court, too, isn't it?
Yeah, and we've all seen articles. I don't know, we'll have time to talk about it, but the articles that are coming out right now from these left-wing publications.
Debbie's holding one.
That are going
Yes.
crazy. They're going crazy because they said, this is horrible. Look at all these judges on the court that are following the Constitution, and they're just apoplectic that they're not politicians. And so that to me was like, I was like, well, I love this because this is testimony to what we've been talking about and how something really significant is happening here that I think is going to be great for the future of the country.
I was going to throw in two things. One, there's a gentleman who works with you at First Liberty, Lathan Watts.
Mm-hmm.
And from my last show before Christmas, my radio show, I had him on. So it was this past Sunday. We pre-recorded, but he was so good. We went through all these cases and not talk just about what the cases are about, but the underlying standard and really what the First Amendment was, the religion clauses in the First Amendment were supposed to be, was supposed to mean, and how they've been contorted, and how there's really a simplicity and a goodness to them if we can get back to that. So that he was excellent. He was really good having the show.
That's
and
great.
Kerby, you mentioned this article. Is it on pointofview.net? This is on from Slate, which is a pretty left-wing thing, left-wing website. It's called "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year to Escape What Trump Judges Did." Okay, maybe that first thing was, I'm sorry, the article is just called "What Trump's Judges Did." But anyway, the point is, it's a really good article, not just to run through. It's a great summary of these decisions that the left are lamenting. These in particular focus on abortion and on the Second Amendment. But what you really grasp if you read this article is the arguments against these judges, the arguments against the decisions coming out that are being criticized in this article. They're not saying the Constitution really meant X, but these judges went off track. They're not arguing the judges are off track. They're arguing the policy. They're arguing these decisions as though they're policy arguments about abortion, about the Second Amendment. They're admitting, without saying it, that they don't really care what the Constitution says or means. They're saying we would prefer a policy on abortion that
we want this outcome, and we don't care what the Constitution has to say.
And these crazy judges out here are actually returning to the meaning of the Second Amendment, the meaning of or looking closely at the abortion decision in the Roe case. And so anyway, it's a really, I urge you, you have a lot of things to read, I'm sure everyone listening, but this is a great thing to read to understand the left-wing mindset. Nothing to do with the Constitution. Everything about we want our way in this policy.
I think it's the 6th article, but again, you'll be able to identify it because it's got a picture of Brett Kavanaugh and James Ho. You know both of those guys, and you've worked with both of them. So
yes.
If they are people that are friends of Kelly Shackelford, then certainly those, and again, we know enough about both of those individuals to know that they have been exactly what we would expect them to be.
And I know we're coming to a break here in a second, and then we'll do phone calls after, but I just want to stress to people, this is end of year. Where else do you hear about this type of thing, right? How many other places do you get info on who the judges are and what's going on? Point of View is probably one of the few places that's going to talk about these types of things. And so when you think of end of year, think of some of the things that are valuable, that provide you good information, or that are doing the things that you really care about. Because a lot of the ministries depend, I know for ours, it's like 30% is at the end of the year. It's 30% of your entire budget for what you're going to be able to do. So support Point of View. Obviously, First Liberty. If we're going to do judges for the next 2 years and get more great judges on, we need help. Go to First Liberty. But be involved and support the groups that you really care about here at your end.
Again, pointofview.net. You can find all the links that you need, or 800-347-5151. We'll be right back.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Next hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos, Kelly Shackelford in studio. I might just mention we have a number of articles, one on the shutdown, one which I thought was very good, questions about immigration, from our friend John Smirek, who says, I don't write about it very often, but he just asked some really good questions, which we might get to. Osama bin Laden was right. This has to do with the issue of Syria. And of course, all week we've tried to give you different perspectives, because there are a lot of different takes on this issue. David French has a belief that we should stay there, and Andrew McCarthy believes that it's probably time to leave because we aren't going to accomplish anything. Cal Thomas has given us another perspective on that. And then we have some on the coverage of Donald Trump's trip to the troops. I think we may come back to that before it's all through. And is the government too big and out of control? And then one on judges. So we've got lots to cover, but let's take a couple of phone calls here as well. And we'll go to Indiana. Larry, I think you've been waiting a while, so thank you for joining us. What's your point of view?
Well, thank you for taking my call. Well, a few comments. Boy, you covered quite a bit. Concerning the immigration, they're arguing, the Democrats are arguing about $5 billion. They never mentioned the $10 billion that we're giving in foreign aid to Central America as well. I think it would be interesting to find out where that's going. Two, also on the immigration, recently there's been cases detected by the Mexican government of everything from lice to chickenpox to very communicable diseases to undiagnosed diseases. We're looking at drugs. We're looking at MS-13. We're looking at 100 ISIS members caught in Central America at the beginning of this caravan, and 10 at the border out of this group. And lastly, concerning the attack on the troops, I'm retired Air Force myself. I wonder how many Democrats for Thanksgiving and for Christmas do what a lot of people do around air bases and the Army bases and such, is they invite the single troops for dinner on Thanksgiving, Christmas, out of the barracks and things. I would venture to say none did that. And so in concerning the Constitution, the attack on the Constitution, we all know, those of us who know the Constitution, know that the Constitution is not there to protect government from us. And I think that's what the Democrats want. They use the Constitution only when it serves furthering their ideology. The Constitution is there to protect us from the government, and that's why it says in the Bill of Rights, the government shall not. It's not they might not, they could not, they may choose not to. It's they shall not.
Yeah, and I think back to that point, the previous president said he didn't like the Constitution because it had so many negatives in it. Remember that?
Charter of Negative Liberties.
Charter of Negative Liberties. Yep. Any thoughts about that?
Well, that's exactly why. The caller said it well. It's a restraint on government. So, and people get confused about this a lot. They think that they have like a right of free speech versus another citizen. And no. You only have a right of free speech versus the government. So if the government wants to tell you can't say something, but if I don't like what you're saying on my lawn, I can say get off my lawn, or on my piece of property. And so that's freedom. The freedom is for all of our citizens. It's to keep the government in its proper place and to recognize certain unalienable rights that we think are so precious that we don't want the government interfering with those. So that's why it is a negative charter, because the government has no power. The other thing, if you look at the Constitution, the government only has the power that it's specifically given, the enumerated rights that it
Right.
has
Mm-hmm.
over areas that it is allowed to operate. Now, of course, we all know that that's been conflated beyond all belief, and that's why government is almost in all kinds of things that it should not be in. And you know, we all lose liberty when that happens. And plus, it's not done as well. Private enterprise does a lot better job with its competition and people innovating and everything else than any sort of monopoly, much less a government monopoly.
Let's talk about the military for just a minute. Of course, one of the individuals that heads up your whole division on the military is Michael Berry, and we've been quoting him quite a bit this week. But they point out that the guidelines to the Department of Defense say active duty personnel may not engage in partisan political activities, and all military personnel should avoid the inference of their political activities imply or appear to sponsor, approve, or endorse a candidate. But then they stop right there. It's kind of like the first part of the First Amendment, because then you go on, it says, but active duty members may, however, express their personal opinions on political candidates and issues, make monetary contributions to political campaigns or organizations, and attend political events as a spectator when not in uniform. So the point is that, okay, an individual brings a Make America Great hat and asks the president to sign it. If you're only looking at the first part, it's kind of like you can't establish religion. But if you look at the second part, it says, but you have the free exercise.
Yeah.
Right? Is that fair?
Yeah.
You know?
It's that it's ridiculous to say that you can't do that. I mean, again, I think everybody knows that. But it's just amazing that, that you can't even take a good story. I mean, you have to try to pervert the good story into something bad. It's just so twisted that CNN, if that's the way they're thinking and what they're trying to do with situations that are in front of them.
It's that Trump derangement syndrome you mentioned earlier. The media cannot stand the idea of the image seen internationally, at least nationally, of some soldier saying, I'm in the military because of you, and please sign this. The image of someone appreciating President Trump, complimenting him, respecting him, just makes them crazy. That is the problem.
And if you reverse it, just recently, the former president, Barack Obama, had a Christmas Santa hat on, went into the hospital. You probably saw that. And I thought it was great. And if he had done that when he was president, I would have just said, great. After all, this is the president of the United States. Whether you voted for him or someday him or her or not, does not matter. I mean, they are representing the country. And just, again, sometimes the enthusiastic 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds might do something, but let's not criticize them the same way. I mean, almost anybody that touches Donald Trump gets in trouble, right?
Yeah. Well, they try to.
I mean, it's just, after all, you just don't understand any of this.
Well, the thing is, if they were smart and they would act fair, Donald Trump does plenty that they can criticize him for. But you lose your voice when you become completely lacking of any credibility. When you take a feel-good story like this, and again, I don't care who the president is, okay? This could easily happen, okay? There's going to be somebody that walks up to the president and said, you're the reason I joined the service. And I think we could all appreciate that, even when we go, well, I don't even like that president, okay? But we think, good. This is, he's serving the military. He did it because of the president. I'm glad something's good happened from this president, right? I mean, that's how you could approach it. But they're so warped, they can't even do that story. And so instead, they've got to try to make the soldier out to be some, criminal because he brought an Make America Great. And he said something nice about the president. And, oh, my gosh. And you just lose your credibility now when the president does plenty of things that he hands you to criticize him with. Yeah. Now you're not, I don't know if I can believe those people because they're kind of crazy. So it's crazy how the media is reacting. They're actually hurting their ability to even do the bias that they'd like to do.
I don't know if we've ever talked in the show about Sarah Sanders, but oh my gosh, what a gift from heaven she is to this White House.
I don't know if she bears it. I can't even watch.
She keeps a pretty serious, straight face, and she lets him go on and on with just saying these crazy things. She's just been kind of a gift to President Trump because she's able to, she doesn't ever back down.
Did not expect her to be as good in her job as she has been. So let's take a break. We have some more phone calls and a lot more to cover. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, we've heard quite a bit these days about fake news, but what about fake science? That is the title of a book by Austin Ruse. He has served as the president of the Center for Family and Human Rights, where he testifies to our government and the United Nations about important issues. He was on my radio program recently to talk about some of the misinformation and false information presented in the media and in various governmental hearings. Some of the book deals with homosexuality and the transgender issue. One chapter addresses whether homosexuals are born that way and whether orientations are immutable. In other words, can people change their sexual orientation? Another chapter addresses the studies that attempt to argue that there is no difference between traditional parents and homosexual parents rearing children. This grand experiment on children has been detrimental to their physical and psychological health. That is why he wanted to set the record straight. Some states have very strict labeling laws for food. Even a minuscule amount of a naturally occurring chemical must have a warning label. But Austin Ruse points out that in order to hit the cancer target zone for acrylamide, a child would have to eat 182 pounds of French fries every single day. A teenager wouldn't even do that on a dare. For decades, Austin Ruse has been testifying on pro-life issues. He reminds us in one chapter that nearly everything the secular media and pro-abortion groups say about abortion is a lie. The same could be said about these groups and what they say about sex education. And he laments how the population control advocates are driving many countries towards a demographic winner. I recommend you read the book, and if you're skeptical of the claims, check out the more than 40 pages of endnotes documenting his critique of fake science. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we'll take a few more phone calls, but we do want to move on to a couple of other issues. But let me, first of all, head out to Nebraska, KCMI. Daryl, what's your point of view?
I heard, I think Mr. Shackelford said a few minutes ago, the reaction to Clinton's impeachment. My thought ever since then was, the embarrassment to me is that we have a party who refused to vote guilty in a case that had so much evidence, and not a single one of that party voted guilty. That really embarrasses me about my country. Thank you.
Well, and again, that's something. Of course, first of all, the Constitution and the framers made it very difficult to remove somebody from office. So first you have the vote for impeachment in the House, and then you have what most people realized was not going to be a removal from office, because two-thirds. No, it's almost impossible to have two-thirds of people in the Senate to agree that the sky is blue, much less that somebody should be impeached. So I understand that. But there is a sense in which I've been seeing some of these articles coming out of talking about how both sides are polarized and both sides have an iron grip. And I'm going, not the Republican Party. I mean, Jeff Flake, does that ring a bell? You know, I mean, I can give you all sorts of names of people that stray from the Republican Party. But to their credit, like it or not, Chuck Schumer can guarantee that not one Democrat will vote for the wall right now. Not one Democrat hardly would vote for Brett Kavanaugh. And that seems to be the tendency, and going all the way back to the 1990s. For our younger listeners, again, not one Democrat voted for the impeachment of Bill Clinton.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, and look, you know, when the caller mentioned that I was talking about that, I was talking about the politics. Not whether it's right or wrong to vote on any of these things. I mean, I'm happy to go into that as well. But what I think was being tried there is the idea that the Republicans thought they knew he couldn't get a conviction. It's kind of like, well, the way it works is it's like you do the impeachment in the House, which is kind of like indicting somebody.
Right.
And then you go to trial in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
But if you know you have to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate and you're not going to get it, then why do you impeach? Well, I think the Republicans thought this is wrong. We're going to smear him and it's going to hurt him in the election. And the American people watched that. And we didn't know back then how people would react, but the American people reacted in that, why are you wasting our time when you could be doing something for us as a country? That's the way they reacted. They were like, you did this. This is all politics. This is ugly stuff. It's not about, doing anything policy-wise for our country, which is why we put you up there. And they reacted pretty forcefully. And so I don't think there's a reason to think that would be different now. I mean, it could be, but I don't think it would. And so just from a purely political standpoint, I think it would be a huge mistake for the Democrats to impeach President Trump for whatever thing they would come up with, knowing that it's going nowhere in the Senate. I think the people would react, and it would actually help Donald Trump become president.
Mark Penn, and we've quoted them recently, was a strategist for Bill Clinton's 1996 presidential campaign, Hillary Clinton's 2000 Senate campaign, and Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign. So he's definitely with the Clintons. Yes. House Democrats shouldn't impeach Trump. It will anger voters, and the Senate won't remove him. And I think he's just saying the same thing, because those of us a little bit older, I know we have some millennials listening. They weren't around back then. But first of all, you have nothing happening in the Senate because they have to convene essentially a trial. So all those nominees you want to get are just completely set off to the side. You have the Chief Justice of the United States that has to preside. So all sorts of things that were supposed to happen in the Supreme Court don't happen either. I just think that this would be the biggest disaster, not just for Democrats, but for the American people and for American government right now. Go ahead.
I could not agree more. And to Kelly's point a moment ago about Bill Clinton, I think a lot of the reaction of the American public, I agree with the notion that they're saying, why don't you be in Congress and doing something for the public? Fix something you're supposed to be fixing. But I also think that there's just a sense that impeachment, even though the standard is really left in the hands of the members of the House, people think it should be something serious and related to your job, like
bribery,
bribery or treason, or lied about a meeting with a treaty you made. I mean, something that relates directly to your job as president, and you turned your back on the American people. That I get people say, okay, that's bad. Yeah. So I think that with Bill Clinton, they think, okay, so the guy's kind of, he's commits adultery. He's not loyal to his wife. We don't like that too much. But that was really, the core of it was committing perjury, right. And which related to adultery. And so I think people say, oh, come on, this is not serious enough. And I think it made the Republicans look nasty and mean, an unjustified impeachment. I think the same thing will happen this time with the Democrats if they go after Trump over something about, well, he didn't pay his taxes. But I think the Democrats are in a very hard place right now because they have been talking about this before Trump even took the oath of office. We're going to remove him. He's illegitimate. We're going to get rid of him. So they got a hard time. They got their base expecting it, but they know history. And Nancy Pelosi at least knows history, and the leaders of the Democrat Party, that the American public's not going to like it. They've got a hard decision to make, and they want to find something really nasty before they'll go for it.
I think that's the one thing I think the Democrats have been doing a lot of very politically foolish things. The socialism label and all these things that are not going to win them national elections. And usually they're much more cunning than the Republicans. The Republicans are the stupid party, right? That's what everybody always says is kind of a joke. And but I think Nancy Pelosi's pretty sophisticated. She's pretty smart on their politics, and so I would think if the Democrats have anything going for them on this, is that she will probably do everything in her power to make sure that they don't push forward an impeachment, because she knows how that will benefit President Trump in the elections. But I think what Debbie is describing is true. Think of what's going to happen here. You've got the base of the Democratic Party who really wants blood. Okay, they're just they want red meat. They want blood, and they want impeachment, and they want all this other stuff. And they're going to be frustrated. And you've got this other part of the party that wants to, kind of keep them from looking crazy and the more moderate side. I mean, they're liberal. They're just not socialist or whatever. And so you got that internal battle going on in the party. And then guess what's going to happen after like maybe a little less than a year? All these people are going to be running for president. And they're all going to be, and so there's going to be some people that are really going, I got to get the base on my side. So I'm going to come out and really push for the most radical stuff. And we're going to see that fight going on in the Democratic Party, I think, for the next 2 years, first through the Congress, but then ultimately through all these presidential candidates.
Let's, if we can, just before we take a break, talk about what next year is like. And I think, Kelly, you've said, and I completely agree, I think all of us around the table, we're going to have gridlock. The House is going to do investigations, things like that. They're going to try to pass a Green New Deal. It's going nowhere in the Senate. They're going to try to pass Medicare for all. I doubt it will pass, but even so, it's going nowhere in the Senate. So it really brings back to what the Senate can do. And the article that we have posted and we talked about yesterday, when you look at Senate confirmation just in the cabinet, less than half of the positions in these cabinet offices have been confirmed by the Senate.
That's ridiculous.
Justice, EPA, Transportation, and Interior. And then just barely half have been filled in State, Labor, Treasury, and HUD. Let's add to that, how many now federal judges need to be confirmed? It seems to me that the action is going to be in the confirmation of cabinet officers and judges. And after 2 years, that's maybe all that's going to have taken place.
Yeah, let me first say I think this is ridiculous. And I don't care who is president and who is the other party. They should not allow this to happen. I mean, the way it works in the Constitution is the president nominates, whether it's a cabinet level person or whatever, or Supreme Court justice or lower court justice. The Senate advises and consents. So they confirm. The idea that what the Democrats have done is they've used a rule that was meant to just allow, oh, wait, I've got a problem with this person. Let's have a little time for discussion, et cetera. It was meant for a very exceptional case. And what they've now done is they've activated that on every single nominee, even people they're going to all vote for, just to bog the whole system down so the president can never get his nominees through. This is totally against what we want for our country. The Senate should obliterate these rules because, or at least if this kind of abuse occurs, they should change the rules and say we're going to limit this now to 1 hour of debate instead of 30. When we elect a president, we want him to be able to pick his staff. Now, the Senate should have to confirm. That's the constitutional way. We don't want some crazy person but otherwise you give the president their staff. You know they're going to be of the perspective of the president.
That's pretty much what Republicans did for Barack Obama, right?
Yeah, and you let them, you say, okay, you can have your Treasury Secretary and you can have your you name it. You can have all these things. we're going to vote these through. When you don't do that, you really cripple our entire government. And I think this is totally against what the Constitution is trying to do.
We don't have a Secretary of Defense. We don't have the Chief of Staff of the President. We don't have an Attorney General. This is getting out of hand. Anyway, we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, and I might just mention the final Friday in 2018. We have our roundtable discussion, and Kelly Shackelford, Debbie Georgatos. I will mention we will do kind of a year in review on Monday. Penna Dexter and Nick Pitts will be with us, and we'll do some of that as well. And just before we get to another issue, we've been talking about religious liberty, and everybody's been asking me, and I guess I need to ask you about the Christmas postage stamp question, which we talked about last week. And I said, well, I don't think any movement on that, but give us an update, first of all, because some people don't always have a chance to hear every Friday. So talk about it.
Well, it started with Clark and Tavia Hunt and their family. Clark Hunt's the owner of the Kansas City Chiefs, and it's a very well-known Christian family, very outspoken about their faith, and they do the right things. They always send out a Christmas card and have one of those stamps where, and people have seen this, where you can go to certain groups, stamps.com, other groups, and get a picture like your family and put that on the stamp. And they do that with their Christmas cards. Only this year they had a problem. Their picture was them, their family. They were overseas because Clark Hunt also owns the Dallas soccer, and he's real involved in international soccer, and so they were overseas at a soccer deal, and so they and their family went to see I think it's the St. Basil's. Is that also called the Church of the Spilled Blood? Anyway, it's a very famous church in Russia that hasn't been a church for like a long time. It's like a museum now. But anyway, they had their, you can see this, your picture of your family with a building in the background, and their building is this chapel. And they get a note back saying, "I'm sorry, but we can't put that stamp on here." And they're like, "Well, why can't you put the stamp?" "Because there's a chapel in the background." You're kidding me, right? Number one, it hadn't been used as a chapel in 1,000 years or whatever. But number two, there's a chapel in the background. You're not going to do my stamp? They said, "Well, we can Photoshop it out." And they said, "Why?" Wow. Well, it turns out that there's a United States Postal Service regulation that says, now, by the way, the Postal Service does Madonna with Child, does all kinds of religious stamps, but you citizens, you're not allowed to have a picture of your family if there's a church in the background. Why? Because it says specifically, you cannot put anything on your stamp that would be inappropriate for children. And you're like, okay, you're telling me the church in the background is inappropriate? Well, no, what it specifically says after that is, it says, for instance, you can't have content this is a quote I'm giving you, religious, violent, or sexual. Okay, so if there's a chapel in the background now, it violates United States Postal Service regulations. So since then, we not only have the Hunts that we're representing, but we've had other people call us and say, "You won't believe what they did with my." I mean, we've even had veterans that were told they could not put anything with regard to their veteran picture in the background. So I don't know how big this lawsuit's going to get before we get started here, but this is a pretty amazing United States Postal Service regulation that obviously needs to be changed.
I would think this would be one the Postal Service would instantly capitulate. Just say, you know what, this was written 50 years ago. We didn't know what we're thinking.
They did it within the last year.
Oh, my gosh. Okay.
They did this.
Then you take them on. I really did think it was I thought it was going to be something that, okay, that was really dumb. 50. I don't know what we were thinking. So this is a current idea.
Yes.
And you're right. The postage stamps we use on Christmas cards there's one that has the three wise men. I'm riding on a camel. I mean, the religious symbols all over the ones that we buy from the post office. That's truly amazing.
Isn't that incredible?
That's why I think I'm going to wager. Guess they're going to bail out. What's the right word? Bail out. They're going to surrender pretty soon.
And if people want, they can see the picture themselves.
Yeah, you got it right there on the website. We just had the link from last week. You can find it. Yeah, or just go to First Liberty.
Go to firstliberty.org or go to pointofview.net and look on it. You can see the picture, the picture with the offensive content that is inappropriate for children. You and your family in front of a chapel overseas somewhere that you can't even really tell it's a chapel.
Wow.
Yeah.
It just looked like a Russian building.
If you go to firstliberty.org, in the upper right-hand corner, it says Hunt for a Christmas Stamp, and it's U.S. Postal Service rejects custom stamp for being too religious. So,
Yep.
And you click on there, you get to see the picture and look at it for yourself. You will be amazed. And don't you this is like a Christmas gift, though. I mean, some of these cases that First Liberty get, you go, oh, okay, that's going to be a tough one. This one is slam dunk.
Well, you know,
all over it, don't
at
you
first,
think?
some of the media wouldn't cover it because they couldn't believe it was true.
Todd Starnes for a while couldn't get Fox to print it because they said, you got to be making this up. Of course, Kelly comes in with these stories all the time. I'm sure he's making them up, and unfortunately, they're all true.
Well, seeing it in writing was the religious, sexual, or violent or sexual was. I was like, okay, that can't be. I was like, that can't be what they put in their regulation. That's what they put in the regulation. So anyway, good case for the First Amendment and hopefully restoring freedom for our citizens in the United States.
I hope you uncovered the legislative history behind that. Like, what were they thinking at the time they wrote that? Anyway, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, if it makes a case for the fact that we really need to pay attention to what's going to happen in the Senate. I think in this next year, we'll keep reporting what the House of Representatives is doing and all the investigations and the bills they're going to try to pass. But I think in our minds, at least the back of my mind, we're going to know none of these are going to pass the Senate. None of them are going to be signed by the president. So the real action is going to be in the Senate.
Yes.
And as you said just a minute ago, I mean, let's recognize that some of this is due to the Trump administration. He fired his Secretary of Defense, now has an acting one. Of course, the Attorney General stepped down, so he's got an acting one there. And he, of course, needs a chief of staff. But all the others have to do with the Democrats digging in their heels. And you don't even have half the positions filled in the Justice Department, in the Environmental Protection Agency, in the Transportation Department, and the Department of Interior. And you barely have half filled in the State Department, in Labor, in the Treasury Department, and in Housing and Urban Development. This is a scandal. This is almost 2 years into the Trump administration. Nothing like this has ever happened before that I know of.
Yeah, and the nominees, as you say, many nominations have been made by the Trump administration. They're waiting for the confirmation.
Just waiting. That's just.
I was mentioning on our break that there was a talk I went to recently by a woman who is a former U.S. She's the youngest U.S. attorney ever appointed. She's a very, very well known and very connected in Washington. She's basically saying that the impact of these kind of things, of not having these people appointed, is at the lower, just beneath the level of people requiring Senate confirmation, but the high-level administration people inside numerous federal agencies are really Obama-era holdouts, or they're carryovers.
Of course they are.
And they continue doing Obama-era policies. There's not enough power at the top of the agencies to bring about the change needed. And so it's very impactful in terms of, it's hard to envision, sitting back here in Dallas or wherever you are listening, how much it matters. But in Washington, these agencies hold tremendous power, and to have people not aligned with the president and his agenda, which is a very different agenda than the previous president, not aligned, not helping, it really does stall his agenda, along with now the divided House and Senate also stalling his agenda. And I don't know if you talked last or sometime up before today about the General Mattis situation, but I'll just say this about that. Leaving Syria out of it, I do have a lot of opinions about Syria, but leaving Syria out of it, General Mattis, who is God bless every war hero, every person in our military, so appreciate them. This is a guy who, on very huge, prominent, international, significant issues, publicly differed with the president. One relating to the pullout of the climate deal in Paris, which is this, it was a thing that President Trump thought was right. I happen to agree with him that getting out of the climate deal, pulling out of the Iranian nuclear deal. And you think about, and so the idea that those kinds of things where you're opposed, and he also, and I brought the article with me, but he also attempted to bring in a number two person under him, under General Mattis, who's a deeply embedded Muslim Brotherhood sympathizer. So this is a person who, for whatever reason, has significant differences from the president in his views. And it is very similar to a corporation when if the president has someone and the top level people or disagree with the direction you're going to take the company, or in our law firm, our large law firm, my husband and I both practice in California, you have a partner who's just off track. You don't let them, Trump is being criticized for just saying, well, if Mattis needs to go soon. But if you're really not on the same page, you have to get them out. You have to keep your administration on track with your agenda.
And it's hard to do that if you can't get people confirmed. And again, what's been going on is wrong. The only good news is the U.S. Senate is going to have very little to do. They can't pass. I mean, it's not like legislation is going to be coming out of the House that they're going to be passing. Okay, the House and the Senate are not going to be passing legislation basically this next session. But the one thing that goes through the Senate, and they don't need the House, is confirmations, and that's not only judicial, but all these cabinet level seats that they need. And so, and the other thing is, it's different. It's not 51-49. It was 51-49, very close. You lose Flake or whatever, you have a problem. Now it's 53-47, and it's probably a stronger 53 than you had, because there's not Flake. There's people like Josh Hawley, and there's not Corker. It's Marsha Blackburn. So I think the Senate is going to be in a position to really move through confirmations, including judicial confirmations.
We'll talk about the significance of that right after this.
Over 3 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the fundamental right to marry is guaranteed to same-sex couples. The ruling has resulted in all states being required to perform and recognize same-sex marriages. This was a 5-4 decision along liberal-conservative ideological lines. The swing vote was now retired Justice Anthony Kennedy. He wrote the opinion for the majority. It turns out Justice Kennedy's thinking had little to do with the Constitution. He sat down recently with Bloomberg TV host David Rubenstein and revealed that for him, Obergefell v. Hodges was more of a policy preference than a decision based on constitutional reasoning. Justice Kennedy is Catholic. He stated in this interview that because of his religious beliefs, he surprised himself in coming to this decision. He said he was concerned about correcting an injustice for the future. He brought up adoption by gay couples, saying, "As I thought about this, and I thought about it more and more, it seemed wrong, unconstitutional to say that over 100,000 adopted children could not have their parents married. But redefining marriage deprives those children of one biological parent. That's constitutional?" Justice Kennedy also told host David Rubenstein that your duty in every case is to ask why you are doing what you're about to do. But where's the part about a justice's duty to interpret the Constitution? Family Research Council's Peter Spriggs sums up Justice Kennedy's role in this ruling. He decided he thought it was a good idea, so he decided to impose it on the country. So glad he's off the court. Maybe someday a court will return the definition of marriage to the one we had for millennia, that does so much good in a society. But in 2019, we can move forward on marriage. In this post-Obergefell climate, we must explain how natural marriage preserves a healthy culture and enact policies that support and encourage it. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and again, we are privileged to have in studio with us for just a few more minutes, Kelly Shackelford and Debbie Georgatos. And before we are ending this hour, I do want to talk about supporting both of those ministries that we've been talking about. But the article by Kevin Williamson, he's got a great line there. The federal government is a big, sprawling, messy thing. And first of all, we've pointed out that we have a shutdown. We've pointed out that we have all sorts of positions that are not being filled in the cabinet. But there was an article that I saw years ago that came out It was actually a piece by Jim DeMint. At that time, he was senator. Later, of course, he went to the Heritage Foundation, in which he was saying the problem is we have the bigs, as he calls them, because we have big government, we got big business, we got big labor. But he used an example, and I put it in one of my commentaries, that at that time, the federal government spent about $3.5 trillion. Now it's $3.9 trillion if you count all the spending, Social Security and everything. And it has, at that time, about 4.5 million employees in round numbers. I'll just use that number real quickly. And just to compare that, the largest company that you can think of would be like Walmart. Well, it has a revenue about $470 billion and has about 2 million individuals. So you're really talking about the fact that at that time when we were writing about that, you had Barack Obama, who had never really managed anything. He was a freshman senator, actually sitting on the top of the largest organization that has ever existed on the planet. Now you can say, well, yeah, we got Donald Trump, but still the Donald Trump empire pales in comparison to the huge federal government that, to use the Walmart example, it would not even be the second biggest federal program. Walmart, the biggest thing we can think of in the private sector, and this enormous bureaucracy. And then back to the point you made just a minute ago about the fact that these lower level bureaucrats are pretty much running all of that. I think, I know we get in trouble by saying we think the government's too big, but it really is too big. And I think this number shows you very quickly how big it is and how sprawling it is and what big mess it is right now.
Couldn't agree more. And what's so interesting about this, among the other things that Donald Trump ran on besides the border wall, was his mantra or phrase, drain the swamp. And there, Washington, D.C. historically actually was a swamp, which is kind of funny that, I don't know if you knew that or not when that phrase came about, but in addition to getting rid of a lot of regulations, which Shackelford was mentioning earlier, that has been accomplished by this president, just using the Congressional Review Act and taking down a lot of regulations. So there's been a reduction on the pressure regulations created on businesses. That's one form of the swamp. But one thing that may happen this shutdown is that people realize as the government rolls on, and actually everything seems to be just fine. I mean, it's not perfect. You don't want to have this long term. But the idea of recognizing drain the swamp should mean, in part, to vastly reduce the size of the federal government, to get real about what really happens when we don't have whatever the percentage of the workforce is in these various agencies. And I did a thing on my show that went through that. It's really very well done, these government shutdowns, meaning that the essential services are still provided. The agencies that are largely built around essential services maintain most of their workers. And the ones that have a bunch of things we don't really need to be doing anyway at the federal level, a large percent of those people are sent home. And so maybe this will have an ultimate effect of having people in Washington realize we could live with less government, and maybe America would be better off if we did, and our expenses every year would be less because we'd be paying all these people and they'd have to go out and be productive citizens. I mean, may have a really big drain the swamp impact that wasn't even anticipated at the time this border wall funding argument started.
Debbie's really optimistic.
Yes,
yes, I am.
What did Ronald Reagan say? The closest thing to immortality is a government program.
Yeah.
They just never cut. Never cut.
Yeah, it's boy, I mean, he's done. President Trump has done something that really no president's done, which is really he actually has cut back on some government. The regulations for every new regulation, there's 22 that's been repealed. That's had a huge impact.
It has
on people. I know he's said to all of his cabinet level people, didn't he say 5% cut? I think it was. That, I mean, he's trying to do something that people haven't done before that I think everybody knows needs to be done. I mean, we all have to do this in our own budgets. I mean, can you imagine if in our family budget we're every year like, no, I'm guaranteed to go up 10% this year. That's not the way we do our budget. We actually at times have to go, we got to do something even extra. And those are great disciplines to cut out. And even for businesses, the business, leaders will tell you that the lean times are really good for them. It's sort of they cut the fat. Mm-hmm. They get much leaner. And then when things go up, they're much more productive. They're much more, they have much more, fruit from what they're doing. And so that's really all a part of a good, healthy thing. And so when the government doesn't have to do that, and it's not even subject to the free market competition, I think it's a really good thing to do.
Well, just before we run out of time, I wanted to talk about the fact that we're coming to year end, and we'll talk first about First Liberty and then about Point of View. And first of all, you've had some great successes, but you are going to have oral arguments before the Supreme Court for sure, one case in February and maybe another. We'll see whether that is the case. So you need some financial support just like anybody else, right?
Yeah, I would encourage people put on their calendar February the 27th because we will be arguing. It'll be the only case that day. They've set only our case before the Supreme Court. It'll not only be important for all of our veterans memorials across the country, including in Arlington Cemetery, but also it will affect religious freedom for the future and how we approach the Establishment Clause and all the things that judges have made up in the past, terminology that's not in the Constitution. So it'll have a long-term impact. So be praying. And we've got only a major Supreme Court case, but we've got all these judicial seats that we're working to vet to make sure we get excellent judges on all these courts and to try to do our part to help. And there's two other cases we have sitting at the Supreme Court. Coach Kennedy case, which we could hear at any time. We're going to have the Klein case out of Oregon, the two bakers.
The bakers. Yeah.
And who were fined $135,000 for not doing the same-sex wedding cake and told they were not allowed to speak publicly their beliefs about marriage. I mean, it's just an incredible set of facts, and their business has been bankrupted. So we got three cases, just not to count the other 400 or so we had this last year. So we could definitely use anybody's support. And like Point of View, we're a 501c3, so all deductions they're tax deductible, all donations. So would love anybody who has a heart for religious freedom and wants to be a part of, I think, what's going to be an historic year this next year. Get some skin in the game, get involved, because I think it's going to be unbelievable what's going to happen in 2019.
And again, I've said before, you really need to support Point of View and First Liberty. There's the First Liberty one. There's the Point of View one. So you can see, two different organizations, two different envelopes. But again, just before we run out of time, we are encouraging you to go to our website, which is pointofview.net. That's where you can also find the link to First Liberty. But as you go there, you will see it says Give Boldly. And really, we want you to give boldly so that you can be educated, so you can speak out boldly to a culture that desperately needs it. And as Kelly said just a minute ago, we talk about some things that I don't hear on any other talk show, right? No. And so appreciate the fact that both of you are willing to come in here. And, of course, you're going to be on this Sunday, right?
Yes, I am. America Can We Talk? And if you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can go to the Facebook page, America Can We Talk, Sunday 6 to 8 p.m. Central, and also on some Salem stations.
Well, we're going to say goodbye just for this last Friday in 2018. We'll be here for Friday in 2019. But just before we do so, let me just again encourage you to go to the website. It is pointofview.net. We do have a matching fund. So if you would want to give $100, it becomes $200. If you want to give $500, it becomes $1,000. And we have certainly not used up all the matching fund. I wish we had, but we haven't. So we still have some needs. We do have some financial needs. So that's one thing. Even though we're going off the air, you can also give us a call. This is a different number. It's 800-347-5151. That's a pledge line number. And again, if you would like to talk to someone, you can do that as well. 800-347-5151. Want to thank Andrew and Steve and Stephanie for their help behind the scenes. Have a great weekend. We'll do our year in review on Monday right here on Point of View.
There was a time not long ago when Christians were derided as people who didn't believe in science. Many of those same critics now tell us that men can be women. Who doesn't believe in science now? There's no doubting we face difficult challenges, but as followers of Jesus, as believers in liberty, we must never forget the only way we can lose is by giving up or not trying. You have an opportunity right now to make a strong statement about what you believe. A few Point of View listeners have made a challenge. If you will give, they will match it. If you invest $10,000, they'll make it $20,000. When you donate $50, they'll make it $100,000. They'll double your gift all the way up to $65,000 if you give before the year ends. So, have you given up? Have you stopped trying? Make a difference. Make your next bold move now. Give online at pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151. It's our future. The time is now. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.